Hello, everybody. My name is Joy Smith, and you're tuning in to the Autonomy of Blackness.
Hello, everyone. I'm hoping that everyone is doing wonderful and continually showing up for themselves in the ways they need to. I am currently resting and recovering from this little sickness that I got going around. I wanted to still get a podcast episode out because I really wanted to share some wisdom, specifically on topics that I haven't fully went into depth with. And one of those being Black women and how they're showcased on mainstream media. I wanted to touch on constant representation of aggression within reality television show, but more specifically, Bad Girls Club and Baddies. Franchises like Bad Girls Club and platforms like Zeus Network don't just capture Black women's pain. They run a casting to spectacle pipeline that selects for open wounds, builds a stage around them, and packages the resulting rupture as entertainment. We're conditioning audiences to consume stuff as content instead of recognizing it as a systematic wound.
So, let's actually sit with the word pipeline because I don't use it lightly or loosely. And a pipeline implies a process, intake, filtering, output. And when you look at how casting operates and how shows like Bad Girls Club or how Zeus Network builds out a franchise like Baddies, it starts to look like less of an audition and more like a screening process, and one that specifically is searching for something within these women. It seems as though they're looking less for talent or charisma, and in actuality, it seems though producers are searching for volatility within these women. They're looking for people in the industry's own language who have strong personalities, which if you actually decode that phrase tends to mean someone whose nervous system is already primed, someone who's going to react instead of respond, or someone whose wound is close enough to the surface that a camera, a room full of strangers, and a few well-placed provocations will get it fast. And that's not me speculating about intention, that's just production's design. Reality TV formats are built around isolation, sleep manipulation, engineered scarcity, manufactured conflict. If you take a person and remove their normal support system, remove their sleep, remove their sense of control over their own environment, and then put a camera on them and wait, you're not going to get a personality to show up. You're only catching a nervous system under distress, on tape, and being sold for entertainment. And here's where it gets into the psychology aspect, because I don't want this to just be a feeling I have. There's actual research behind why this works on us as viewers. Psychologists Craig Anderson and Brad Bushman have done decades of work on something called desensitization. Basically, what happens to us emotionally when we're repeatedly exposed to distressing content. And what they have found is that it's not that we stop seeing the pain, it's that our sympathy for that person in pain measurably drops the more we're exposed to it. They called one of this in their papers comfortably numb, and that phrase has stuck with me because that's exactly the mechanism. It's not that we become monsters, it's that repetition does something to the nervous system. Ours specifically this time, not just the woman's on screen. We get comfortably numb watching Black women unravel. So now you have two nervous systems in the equation. Hers, engineered into dysregulation for the sake of footage, and our own, slowly trained by repetition to stop registering that dysregulation as something that should concern us. That's the pipeline. That's what I mean when I say it's industrial, not individual. This type of system has been around for a minute, even before Zeus Network. It has a lineage, and I think it's important we actually trace it because you see the pattern stretched out over almost 20 years. It stops looking like a coincidence and it starts looking like a business model that just keeps refining itself. Bad Girls Club premiered in 2006 on Oxygen. It was created by Jonathan Murray, same producer behind The Real World, which matters because that's the DNA this whole genre comes from. 7 women, a mansion, 3 months, cameras that don't stop rolling, and the casting call wasn't for talent or even for charisma. It was explicitly for what they called charismatic tough chicks. That's the language they use publicly, not interesting people, tough chicks. They were casting for volatility from day one, and they said so out loud. And the show ran for 17 seasons, over 270 episodes because it worked. Season 4 premieres became Oxygen's most watched telecasts up to that point. Midway through that season, an episode crossed 2 million viewers, the first time that had ever happened for that network. So we're not just talking about a niche show that slipped through some crack in the industry. We're talking about appointment television shows, sustained by conflict, that built an entire network's ratings identity.
Further along the way, there was complications legally, a lawsuit on record, two sisters who joined the cast that got hazed with a prank that escalated into an actual physical assault on camera, and later sued the production company, alleging in their filing that the network heads themselves approved, ratified, and knowingly agreed to what happened because it benefited the company. There's also the incident with the cast member Christina Hopkins caught on tape hurling racial slurs at a black castmate, footage that went viral, and Oxygen did eventually cut her from the network entirely, but there's still the fact that they allowed it to happen. That was the minimum, some kind of stealing, some point where even Oxygen said this is bad for us. Now fast forward, Zeus Network doesn't have that ceiling, and I don't think that's a small detail, I think that's the evolution. Oxygen was an advertiser-supported cable network, which means brands had some say in what they were willing to be associated with. Zeus runs on a subscription model. Viewers pay directly for access to the most unfiltered version of this, which means the thing that used to function as a break, advertiser discomfort, is just gone entirely. There's no one in the room saying this is bad for us because the business model is built to reward exactly the footage that would have made an advertiser walk. This is the direct line to Krishan Rock. Her entry point into this industry was as an OnlyFans reality show inside Blueface's house, a format built around women competing for his attention on camera. From there, she was signed to his label, cast on Baddies, and then given her own show, Crazy in Love, which wasn't really about her music or her life. It was built entirely around the volatility of her relationship. The trailer itself was marketed on that phrase, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's not subtext, that's the pitch. And what's important here is that her origin story, she's spoken publicly about growing up in West Baltimore, her father incarcerated for most of her childhood, periods of real instability. And that backstory isn't separate from her casting. And this pipeline, a documented history of hardship, isn't something a network protects a person from being exploited around. It's part of what makes someone castable. The wound isn't a liability to the format, it's the raw material. And I want to be very clear about something before we move on. This isn't a Zeus Network problem or a Krishan Rock problem. There's academic work specifically on Love and Hip Hop, a totally different franchise on a totally different network, finding the same structural pattern. Black women's conflict functioning as the engine of the format, repeated across VH1's highest rated reality property for over a decade. Moya Bailey, the scholar who coined the term Misogynoir, built her entire framework around this exactly. How anti-black sexist representation gets manufactured and sold across visual media, not as an accident of anyone's show, but as a pattern that recurs anywhere the insensitive structure rewards it. So when we trace it, Oxygen to VH1 to Zeus, we're actually watching the same mechanism, just with fewer and fewer guardrails each time it gets rebuilt. I want to go a little deeper on the desensitization because numbness isn't the only thing repetition does to us. It also builds something, and this is where I want to bring in a distinction that I think gets collapsed a lot. The difference between media as a mirror and media as a mold. A mirror reflects something that's already there. A mold shapes the thing that goes into it. And for a long time, the defense of shows like this has been a mirror argument. This is just reality. We're just filming what's already happening. But there's an actual media research that pushes back on that pretty hard. George Gerbiner's cultivation theory. This goes back to the 70s, but it's held up, found that heavy, repeated exposure to a particular pattern on screen doesn't just reflect a viewer's sense of reality, but it cultivates it. He called the version of this around violence mean world syndrome. People who watched more violent television consistently came to believe the world was more dangerous than it was. Whether or not that matched the real environment, the screen wasn't just reporting reality back to them, it was building their expectation of reality, one repetition at a time. Now apply that same mechanism here. If the primary image a viewer sees of a black woman over and over across networks and across almost 20 years is rupture, screaming, fighting, unraveling, that's not just describing something that already existed about black womanhood. That's cultivating an expectation of it. That's mold, not mirror. And it doesn't just shape how other people see black women, it shapes how black women raised on this same media diet learn to expect themselves to be seen. And sometimes how they learn to perform. That's identity formationing happening through a screen, whether anybody involved consented to that curriculum or not, which brings me to the aftermath.
Because once that image is out there, repeated enough times to become the image, something happens to the actual person underneath it. Something I'd call identity foreclosure. That's a real term from identity development research, and it describes what happens when someone's sense of self gets locked in from the outside before they've had room to define it themselves. And I don't think that there's a clear modern example of that than what's happened to Krishan Rock. Her most publicly circulated moments, the most dysregulated, most unraveled moments of her life, aren't footnotes to her story anymore. For a huge portion of the public, they are her story. The rest of who she is competes with a highlight reel she didn't get to choose and can't fully outrun. So the question this segment is really asking, what would it actually take to reverse that? And I think the language for it already exists. Bell Hooks wrote about something called the oppositional gaze. It was this idea that historically, Black women were denied the right to even look back, to hold a perspective of their own inside a culture that only wanted to look at them. She argued that the acting of looking on your own terms, authoring your own perspective instead of just being the object of someone else's, is itself a form of resistance. Reclaiming the gaze in this context means the difference between a Black woman being looked at by a format built to extract her worst moments versus a Black woman authoring her own narrative, her own footage, her own platform, her own editing room, her own say over which moments gets to represent the whole of her. And that's not a small ask. It means changing who owns the cameras, not just who's in front of them. But naming it is the first move, because you can't reclaim authorship over a narrative you haven't first recognized was taken from you. There's a piece of history that shows us exactly what it looks like when the reclamation doesn't happen. When someone gets close enough to real power inside this machine and uses it to run the machine harder instead of dismantling it. Natalie Nunn came onto season 4 of Batgirls Club in 2009 as, in the show's own language, the socialite. What usually doesn't get mentioned alongside is that she graduated from USC on a full soccer scholarship with a degree in sociology and communications. The actual study of group dynamics, social behavior, how people move within a system. And in an interview around the same time, she said the quiet part out loud that she used what she learned studying sociology to read the other women in the house, to figure out how to get what she wanted out of them, how to steer the room. That's not insight being used to protect anybody. That's a set of tools built to understand human behavior, pointed directly at other women in service of winning airtime inside a format that profits off of their unraveling. And she didn't leave that approach behind when the camera stopped rolling on her season. She built on it. Natalie Nunn is now the executive producer and the face of Zeus Network's Baddies franchise, meaning the same sociological literacy she once used to manipulate a house full of women for content is now the operating logic of an entire pipeline she runs. She didn't take that knowledge and use it to interrupt the cycle, she used it to scale it. So when we ask what it would take for Black women to hold real authorship over this narrative, here's the caution inside the question. Proximity to power isn't the same as reclamation. Sometimes the person closest to the understanding the harm is the one who monetizes it the most effectively. This is further proof that somebody studied this. Somebody sat in a classroom, learned formally how groups move, how people get provoked, how a room gets steered, and instead of that knowledge becoming a shield for the next generation of Black women walking into these houses, it became the blueprint for how to run more on them, more efficiently at a bigger scale. That's not a personal failing I'm interested in dragging her for. It's actually a much harder thing to sit with than that, because it tells you something about how these systems survive contact with insight. A lot of us assume that if people understood the mechanism and really understood it, that the way sociology degrees let you understand it, the mechanism would lose its power. Knowledge would be the intervention, but Natalie Nunn's argues proof that understanding a system and dismantling a system are two completely different acts. You can see exactly how the machine works, down to the psychological mechanics of it, and still choose to sit in the operator's chair instead of pulling it apart, because the operator's chair pays. The operator's chair comes with a title, with equity, with your name on the company instead of someone else's name. I don't say this to shame her specifically. I say it because I think a lot of us do a smaller version of this in our own lives. We get close enough to see how harmful patterns work in our families, in our industries, in ourselves, and the temptation isn't always to break it. Sometimes the temptation is to finally be the one running it, because for once, that feels like power instead of vulnerability. I understand that pull. I don't think it's monstrous, I think it's really human. But understanding why it happens doesn't mean we let it go unexamined. And that's really the hinge this whole episode turns on. Not who's the villain in this story, because I don't think that the question gets us anywhere useful. The real question is what any of us do when we get close enough to the mechanism to actually change it. Do we use that proximity to protect the people still caught in it? Or do we use it to finally stop being the one it's happening to, even if that means becoming the one it's happening through? I want to leave you with something to actually sit with this week. The next time a clip comes across your feed, a woman, probably a Black woman, in the middle of falling apart on camera, I want you to notice the half second before you react. Before you laugh, before you screenshot it, before you scroll. That's the only moment you actually get to choose in this entire pipeline, whether you're going to look at her or look with her. Because everything we talked about today, the casting pipeline, the desensitization, the mold instead of the mirror, someone with the tools to understand all of this choosing to run the machine instead of breaking it. None of it works without an audience willing to keep watching. So ask yourself, where in your own life have you let a highlight reel stand in for a whole person? And where have you gotten close enough to a harmful pattern to change it and chosen the operator's chair instead? Because autonomy was never just about who's on the screen or who's holding the camera. It's about who's still awake behind the eyes watching it, not just protection for the ones being watched, vigilance for the ones doing the watching. Attention is modern day currency, not metaphorically, literally, structurally. That's the business model. Every platform we've talked about today doesn't get paid when you feel something, it gets paid when you stay. Your eyes on the screen, your thumb not moving to the next app, the extra 4 seconds you spend watching a woman unravel instead of looking away, that's the actual product being sold to the advertisers, to subscribers, to shareholders. Herbert Simon, an economist, said something decades ago that I think about a lot. That in a world overflowing with information, what happens becomes scarce isn't information anymore, it's attention. And whatever is scarce is what gets fought over. So every design choice in this pipeline, the nicknames, the manufactured conflict, the cut to the commercial right before the fights break out, all of it is engineered around one goal: keep the currency flowing, keep you spending your intention here instead of somewhere else. Which means every time you give your attention to this kind of content without noticing you're doing it, you're not just a viewer, you're a customer paying in a currency didn't realize you had for a product built out of someone else's worst moments. So here's what I actually want you to do with that. Practically starting this week, not a purity test. I'm not asking you to swear off reality TV forever. I'm asking you to bring intention to it, because intention is the one thing this entire pipeline is designed to bypass. Notice what autoplays. Most of us don't choose the 5th clip in a row. The algorithm chooses it for us, and the algorithm has already learned the conflict keeps you longer than calm does. So interrupt that. Close the app after the thing you actually meant to watch before it can hand you the next one. Ask yourself before you share or comment on a clip like this whether you're adding understanding to it or you're just adding fuel. Both feel like engagement. Only one of them is actually worth your currency. And give yourself real content to replace it with, not as punishment, but because attention that isn't spent on a spectacle has to go somewhere. Let it go towards something that treats a Black woman as a full person instead of a moment. That's not a small substitution. Over time, that's literally retraining the same nervous system we talked about earlier back in the other direction. None of this fixes the pipeline. The pipeline isn't going to dismantle itself because of a few of us closing the app, but it does return something to you, and the whole system is built to take without asking. Your say over where your attention, and by extension your sympathy, actually goes. So what I want to leave you with this week, not a call to boycott or anything, a call to notice. Notice the half second. Notice the autoplay. Notice what you're paying with every time you stay a little longer than you meant to. Because that noticing is the beginning of autonomy, not the end of it, just the beginning. The rest is a practice. The same anything worth protecting is a practice. I sat with a lot of hard footage to bring you this. Hard history, hard patterns, a name I had to sit with instead of just react to. And I think that's actually the point. This work isn't supposed to be comfortable. If it were comfortable, it wouldn't be autonomy. It would just be another feed to scroll past. So here's where I'll leave you. Because autonomy has never just been who's on the screen or who's holding the camera. It's about who's still awake behind the eyes watching it. Not just protection from the ones being watched, awareness for the ones doing the watching. That awareness doesn't end when this episode does. So carry it into your feed today. Notice the half second. Notice who gets cast as spectacle and who gets cast as a whole. And if this sat with you the way it sat with me, I want to actually hear it. Come find me and tell me. I'm at Autonomy of Blackness everywhere on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Substack. Wherever you're listening to this right now, which is most likely Spotify, share this episode with someone who needed to hear it, reframe this way, and let's keep this conversation going past just today. Still resting up this week, so I appreciate everyone being gentle with me and the time it took for me to get this episode out. Thank you for showing up for me, sickness and all, static and all, but that's what showing up for each other looks like. So until then, stay curious, stay sovereign, and stay free.